Good morning. Welcome back to the Secret Garden Homestead. For those of you that are new here, my name is Christina, and me and my family homestead in the Bay Area, California, on roughly a little over an acre of land. Today, as part of our Cooking Through a Beef in a Year series, I am going to be walking through how my family makes stew. I'm going to put the link in the description box below on the recipe that I originally used, and since getting that recipe, I've kind of modified it quite a bit. So you'll notice I'm not doing exactly what that recipe says, but overall, this recipe, I've tried a few recipes. This one took the cake. It was so good. So first, what I have here is 2 pounds of stew meat that my butcher cut up for me. If you don't have stew meat already cut up, you can take one of your like chuck roasts or bottom round roast and you can just cut it into cubes and you can use that for this recipe. For me, when we got our freezer beef, I left some as roasts and then I got a lot of stew meat. So I had the option of using those as roasts or cutting them down further later if I run out of stew meat. Stew is such a great meal because it takes a little bit of upfront effort, and then I can let it simmer on the stove for a few hours and I don't really have to touch it, maybe stir it here or there. So for our family, we love the taste of it, but then also it's just really simple. So this part of making the stew is probably one of the more time-intensive parts, and that is I want to coat my 2 pounds of stew in flour and pepper. And then I want to essentially brown each piece of meat on the stove. One thing I should add is that I'm actually going to be doubling this recipe for my family so that we have some leftovers. If I don't double the recipe, I end up just having no leftovers, and I want to have leftovers of stew. So I'm actually going to be using 4 pounds of stew meat instead. The recipe only calls for 1 pound of stew meat. I use 2 pounds when I'm not doubling the recipe. When I'm doubling the recipe, I use 4. The recipe would say to use 2. We enjoy a very meaty stew, so that's why I'm doubling the recipe here. Okay, so I've put in about 2/3 cup of flour, and then what it calls for is about a 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. And so I have a 1/2 teaspoon here. I'm just going to put it in like this, and then I'm going to give it a good stir. Okay, and this here should coat my 2 pounds of stew meat. So now I'm just going to plop these in, and I'm going to try to get them all coated just right. And don't be afraid to kind of get your hands dirty. You can always wash them later, but you really want to make sure each side of your beef is coated. You don't want to skip this step because this is what makes your stew really tender. Okay, now that I've coated the beef in flour, it should look something like this. Every single part of the surface area of the beef is completely coated in flour. And so now I'm going to bring this over to the stove, and we're going to brown each side of these little pieces of beef. So this is the time-consuming part. Okay, so now I'm here at my stove, and I'm going to just generously put in some avocado oil, is what I use, into my pan. And I use a big stock pot like this, and I'm going to put it probably like medium high, more high than not high. And I'm going to wait for that to get really warm and almost kind of sizzling, and then I'm going to start putting my beef on there. I also grabbed these 2 pans because I don't have another large glass pan, but once the meat is done browning on every side, I'm going to stick it in here. Oh, I can tell that my oil is starting to get really hot, so I'm going to test it with one of my beef stews, and I always do this a little too early, but you want it to like really sizzle when you first pop it in there. Okay, you can tell it's kind of sizzling. So that actually worked out good. And now you don't want to crowd the pan. That's like one of the main issues that people run into is they crowd the pan. So you want there to be space in between all the stew meat that you're putting in here. Now my oven is electric and it doesn't cook evenly, so I am going to have to move these around a little bit so that every piece of meat is getting brown. Okay, we're almost there, and I'm going to show you like the perfect spot to start flipping your meat and what it's going to look like. So I'm going to pull one. Okay. So what you're going to see on this side is that it's very brown and it has like this crispy edge to it, okay? That's the level of crispiness that I want before I start flipping my meat. So I'm going to go ahead and start flipping my meat now. I just want to add that if you're running out of oil in your pan to brown the meat, you can generously just keep adding oil and it shouldn't change the consistency or oddness of the stew. You just want to make sure there's enough oil. You don't want all this brown at the bottom of the pan to get like burnt. So it's important to keep the oil coming the more meat that you have. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put my stove on low, and now what I'm going to do, the next part of the recipe, you're going to want your fan on for this. I'm going to do that. I am going to scrape these bottom bits so that they're part of our stew. This is where all the flavor is. We don't want to skimp on this part either. And what I'm going to do is, it calls for 2 cups of wine because I'm doubling the recipe. It's going to make a lot of smoke because this is really hot. So 4 cups of wine. Sorry, 2 cups of wine, so 4 half cups of wine. And I want at this point to have my stove kind of on low just to create like a simmer. And I'm going to take, I have a rubber spatula, you could use a wooden spatula. I want all the bits to come off, so when I'm scraping it, I want to not feel that there's bits stuck to the bottom. That is going to add like a burnt flavor to your stew. You don't want that. You want all the bits to come up. So it's going to need some time to simmer. So I'm just going to put this on like a low heat and I'm going to let it simmer. I'm also going to add 4 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. So 1, 2, 3, Okay, that's gonna be perfect. And now you're gonna see that this is gonna start to kind of simmer, even though it's on low. And I'm just gonna really spend some time getting all the bits off. From our last video, we ended up making the bone broth. This is what I use, my beef bone broth, for the stew stock. I have about 6 cups here. The recipe is going to call for about 7 instead, so I'm going to add a cup of water to my stew, and then we should be good. We're going to plop the meat back in, and we're just going to let it simmer, stirring occasionally for probably 2 to 3 hours. And then after that, we'll add all of our vegetables to it. So all my brown bits are pretty much off at this point of the bottom. And so I'm going to go ahead and add my beef stock. Again, if you're interested in learning about how to make beef stock or bone broth, check out my video from last week. This is a great way to, again, like I've already made this, it's in my refrigerator. I will make a cup of this in the morning sometimes. And so it's just nice that I made this last week. I'll make some again this week so that I have more for next week. It's just a great way to use up your beef in your freezer, is making stock. And it looks a little red right now, but over time it will turn brown. And so I'm just going to add in my beef to it. And the goal is I want all the beef to be submerged under the liquid. Awesome. Wipe my hands off. I'm going to make sure, give it a good stir, make sure all of the beef is in the pot. My last step is I'm going to add about 5 bay leaves, and then I'm just going to leave this on the stove, and I'm going to periodically stir it so that the meat doesn't get stuck to the bottom of my pot. That's another way that the stew can burn. You want to have your eye on the stew for a little bit of time. You can't just kind of leave it on the stove. It needs a little stir every now and again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to grab my top. I'm going to put this on medium low. I'm going to give it 20 minutes. I'm going to come back and stir. And in the meantime, let's go out to the garden and check out all the trees that are about to bear fruit and what we got going on back there. Okay, I'm heading out to the garden, and I wanted to show you a couple things that we've decided on. Part of having like raw land that's really, really challenging is kind of putting the puzzle pieces together of what goes where, and once you make a final decision, like that's it. So we've been kind of contemplating where things should go in the homestead, and I think we have a good plan. So I'm going to turn you guys around, and I'm going to show you my citrus grove. So this is at the front of our back part of the property, and over here we have a couple of citrus trees, but I am going to be adding a few more that I really, really would like. So here I have some form of lemon, and I have been picking on it. I'll find one that's ripe. I don't know what kind it is. If you guys recognize this tree, you could let me know in the comments below. But it is some form of lemon. It needs a good pruning because it's very, very close to the ground. Let me find you one of the lemons. They're small. They have a very thin flesh to them, or they have a very thin skin to them. This is kind of what one of the ripe lemons looks like. It's not fully ripe yet. I have been picking on it. I'm very excited about our citrus this year. Over here where there's a bunch of roses, I think I'm going to move those. There's also this large lilac back here. I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but I want to add a blood orange tree over here. I think that'd be really cool. I'm not certain what tree this is. This tree came with the homestead, and it has 2 very, very small fruits on it. Let's see if you can see it. I have no idea what it is. It doesn't look super healthy, so I've kind of been babying it and watering it and seeing what happens. So we'll see if we keep that or not. I'll give it another year or so. And then over here, I think we have, this is like the largest navel orange tree I think I've ever seen. I think it's a navel orange tree. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it so much. It has very thick skin. It's easy to peel. It's very sweet fruit. We look forward to this fruit. We had it last year. It was amazing. So we're looking forward to it again this year. I have so many oranges. I mean, I must have a couple hundred on the tree. The tree needs a really good prune. So once the fruit is kind of done and off the tree, then I will go ahead and prune it such that it looks like an actual orange tree and it's not just hanging on the ground like this. Over here, next to that lemon tree I was talking about, I have a grapefruit. It's really small, and I did go ahead and prune it this year. I'm trying to get it to grow larger, and I have two pretty good size grapefruits on them. So let's see here. You can see it. Here's one, and let's see if I can find the other one. Oh, down here. Here's two. I am not the world's largest grapefruit fan, but I do occasionally like to eat them some mornings. So if I had them, I would totally get more used to eating them. So I'm really excited about this fruit. I don't have the tag anymore for what variety it was. I didn't plant it. This actually came with our property, but I think it's sort of like a pink lemonade type grapefruit. So inside's very pink. So I'm really excited about that. Over here, I have a Dancy tangerine. And we were honestly going to get rid of this tree because, when I looked up the tangerine, it has seeds, and I was thinking I want something more like a cutie, or it's a seedless mandarin orange. But I've kind of started to like the idea of having a tangerine. I think it has a little bit different of a flavor, and also it's actually starting to grow up and be healthy. Last year it barely produced anything, and this year it's just loaded with tangerines. Let me show you. So we just have so many. They're everywhere. Look at that cluster up there. So I need to do a good job of pruning it this year. And we're going to try the fruit and see what we think about it. I've heard really great things about Dancy tangerine. And then coming over here, this is a tree that I babied for a really long time at my old place. I actually dug it up and brought it here because it never bared fruit for me at my old place, and I wanted to see if I could get it to bear fruit here. This is a lime tree. Let's see if I can get better light. This is a lime tree. And I feel like limes are one of those things where they're nice to have for some dishes, like if you want them, but you don't like need them all the time. So it just would be really nice to have a lime tree to like pull off a lime, use it, and whatnot. So this is my first year. I potted it, I babied it, and I finally have limes on the lime tree. And I just am so excited about that. I'm gonna get it so it's not in the dark. I don't know if you can see that. So I will be planting that in the ground this year in our little citrus grove, along with this tree over here. So I bought let's see if I can remember the name of it. It is a Satsuma mandarin. I did really like the idea of having more like a cutie style mandarin orange tree. I'm hopeful this will grow well. I think it's a semi-dwarf, and that way we can have basically cuties in our backyard that we can pick for the kids during the winter months. I think this will be such a great add to the orchard. I don't know if Satsumas produce a ton of fruit, so I might want to get a second tree because we have 4 kids, but if you know anything about a Satsuma tree, you can comment in the comments below. I'd love to know your experience with it, especially if you're in California or in zone 9B. That's the zone that we're in. And then last but not least, I have 2 Meyer lemon trees here. One of the Meyer lemon trees, oh, it's flowering. Look at that. How cool. I don't know if you can see that. There's like flowers right there. We got a Meyer lemon tree for a housewarming gift, and then the house did come with a Meyer lemon tree in the ground here, which is obviously not doing well. I think it's too shaded out by the large navel orange tree here, so I think I'm gonna dig this one up and try and baby it and see what if I can bring it back to life. And then this one I will also be planting in our orchard. I think Meyer lemons are delicious. I am so excited to plant one so that we can have lemons when we need them, especially Meyer lemons. They're so good. So that's basically our citrus grove. Again, like I said, I'm thinking about maybe getting another mandarin orange tree and then also a blood orange tree. But if there's any other citrus that you guys would highly recommend, I would love any suggestions that you guys might have. I don't know a ton about citrus. I just know that having lemons and limes on hand are super handy for my style of cooking. And so those are the trees that I gravitated towards, plus the mandarin oranges for like snacking oranges. But if there's like you must have this tree, citrus tree, I would love to plant it in the ground. So leave a comment down below. Now I'm heading to the very back of our property, and back here, this tree came with the property, and it's a pomegranate tree. I have no idea. Let's see if I can get it to zoom in pretty good. I mean, this pomegranate is pretty good size. I have no idea what or how many years this tree is, and it's growing like a bush, which I'm actually wanting it to look more like a tree versus a bush. So I'm gonna have to prune this to become more like a tree. But it had like 7 fruits on it. I think I picked one just to see if it was ripe, and it wasn't. And you can tell like the color is not quite red yet. There's one actually over right there that is the most red. And these, I think these are the wonderful variety, but I don't know. There's no tag on the tree. I could just tell like in the spring, I was like, oh, this is definitely a pomegranate tree. So I'm so excited. I think these are gonna be closer to being ready in November. So when I come to harvest them, I will definitely shoot a video to show you what they look like and if they turned out at all. I don't know, it looks like a fairly young tree to me, but it makes me so excited that in the future, like around November, that we will have fruit in pomegranates. I think that is so cool. Now I'm gonna walk you all the way to the back because we've kind of made a decision on what we're gonna do for part of our property. And this is all the way in the back, which is kind of a bummer, but I think it will be really cool. Something that we've talked a lot about doing is having sort of like a berry patch or berry section of our property. And back here, all the way towards the back, let me show you where this big walnut tree is. There is a very sunny spot that I think would be perfect for berries. Okay, so right here, like where you see all the sunny spot, this is where we're planning on planting our berries. We're gonna do rows of raspberries, blackberries, fall golden raspberries. I don't exactly know the varieties, maybe some boysenberries. Maybe get 4 rows in here, and then all along the fence line, we'll do some more. And then here where it's more shaded, along the fence, I think we're gonna do a bunch of blueberries because I think most blueberries really enjoy like a partial sun. And so we'll end up doing some blueberries here all the way maybe to over there. I wanna get a lot of blueberries in. Basically, I wanna have just a lot of berries for when it's berry season so that we can fully enjoy berries on our property. So at first we thought maybe we put some lambs back here, but after we kind of looked at the property again, we decided it's going to be a perfect spot for our berries. Maybe we put a little picnic table down here so people can pick and then sit under a tree with a picnic table and just enjoy eating fresh berries. I'm also planning on putting maybe a little greenhouse over here that's just going to be full of strawberries. In our zone 9B, it gets so hot and the sun is so intense that the berries will produce until like maybe April or March. And then after that, they just get fried by the sun. So if we can provide them some sort of shade where it's still hot and they want to produce, but they're not going to dry out on the strawberry plant, then we can get strawberries for a lot longer. So I'm going to end up putting those in like a greenhouse, and I'm really excited about that. So that's pretty much the tour of what we've got going now. I feel like we have made a lot of decisions, but the thing about the homestead is that honestly it just takes time. You can plant a tree in the ground, but you don't get fruit for many, many years. And so we're trying to make the decisions now so that we can plant and then have fruit sooner rather than later. So we are going to be planting about 16 more fruit trees that are going to go in our orchard. And then we have a cool video coming up about how we're going to be transforming our orchard as well. So stick around and stay tuned to our channel. We have some big changes coming up. And yeah, we're excited to go into our homestead year 2. But for now, we're going back to the stew to stir it and then give it about 2 to 3 hours before we do the next step. So I have 6 carrots here. The recipe probably calls for like 10. I don't have 10, so I'm just gonna use what I have. I'm gonna cut off the tips of each of them, skin them, and then cut them into little circles. Okay, so now I'm just gonna add this to my stew pot. I'm gonna give it a stir. My stew has just been on a gentle simmer for the last like 3 hours. So again, I'm just coming in and I'm gently stirring it about, at this point, once every 45 minutes. Okay, next I'm gonna cut up some onions. So I have 2 medium-sized onions, so I'm going to cut those up next, and I'm going to finely chop these. Oh, I'm like legitimately crying. Okay, I think that's good enough. I'm gonna pop this in as well. And last but not least, I have my potato. My husband does not like potatoes in stew. He doesn't really like anything super starchy. So the recipe actually calls for 1 potato, or maybe it's 2 potatoes, I forget, per batch that you're making. And I cut that recipe in half, so I only ever put 1 when I'm making 1 pot of stew. Even so, I'm going to just put 1 in, even though I've doubled the recipe, because that's how much he really doesn't like having potatoes in stew. But I think it kind of adds a nice texture. It kind of thickens the soup up a little bit. I think potatoes are good, so I put 1 in there, and whoever gets the little bits of potato, in my opinion, are lucky. So okay, and now I'm done with my potato. I am going to now move this to my pot. I'm going to let it simmer while I go run some errands. And when we come back, I have the final touches I'm gonna put for the stew, and then we're gonna taste it together, and I'm gonna tell you how it tastes. It's gonna be amazing. So stick around. So I'm back now. It's been a couple hours. I've let my vegetables kind of boil in the stew for a while, and now I'm going to add the finishing touches, and I'm going to be done. You can see the nice color of the stew now. It's not pink or red at all. It's like a nice brown. So what I'm going to do is, the recipe doesn't call for this, but I like to add it. I think the soup lacks a little bit of color, and so I'm going to add peas. My grandmother used to make this stew, and I remember it had like lima beans and peas and carrots and things. Of all those things that she used to put in her stew, I like the peas the best. My kids like the peas. I'm just gonna add about half of a size of this 16-ounce bag, so a half a pound of peas. I'm going to stir those in. These cook so fast, so I don't even have to let them sit in here, and in fact they kind of lose color if I do. So I just stir them in, and then for me, I think that that's fine. So I'm going to actually turn the heat down. And then the last thing that you do is you put 4 teaspoons of salt in here. Like I said, normally it'd be 2, but because I doubled the recipe, it's going to be 4. And this is gonna bring out that zing I was talking about from the vinegar. It's so good. Okay. And that's it. The dinner's done. I normally serve this with cornbread. So I have cornbread being prepared in the oven. Sometimes I'll also put it on top of like white rice, and that's also a pretty good starch to go with this meal, but this is our family's favorite stew, and I hope that you guys like it if you try it as well. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I will see you in the next one. God bless. Bye.
Very good, Mommy.
Is it good? Did you actually like stew?